Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're looking at another devblog for Updates New Power, and this time it's time to have a look at the Soviet VTOL aircraft that are coming into the game in Update New Power. This is the Yak-38 and also the Yak-38M. Just like the American and the British tree, the Soviets get access to a premium VTOL aircraft, but also get access to a tech tree one. So no matter, if you want to try the new mechanic or not, you will be able to research it in the normal tech tree, or you'll be able to purchase it, which I think is good, or both, I suppose, if you want to see it like that. So the history behind this thing is pretty interesting, just like a lot of VTOL aircraft. In the 60s, mainly the early 60s, there was a lot of Soviet engineers which were experimenting with the VTOL fixed-wing aircraft design, and it wasn't until December 1967, though, that a formal order to develop a light VTOL strike aircraft, as well as a corresponding trainer version, was issued. And as a result of this, engineers at the Yakovlev Design Bureau began work on the new aircraft in the late 60s. They based their design on experience gained from developing the preceding Yak-36, which was an early VTOL demonstration design, just to show how the idea could work. The new aircraft, which was designated the Yak-36M, was being developed for immediate frontline service, operating both from land bases as well as aircraft carrying ships, and the aircraft's primary role was that of a strike aircraft, engaging ground and surface targets while also being suited to intercept enemy aircraft and helicopters if necessary. And not too long after work on the project began, the first prototype saw completion and conducted its maiden flight in December of 1970. And subsequent prototypes and trials continued testing the aircraft's performance, particularly the VTOL capabilities, since that was what the design was based around. And by 1973, the aircraft was considered ready and serial production commenced. After some further testing and also crew training, the aircraft officially entered service with the Soviet Navy in August 1977, and it received the designation Yak-38. And by 1982, over 140 Yak-38s were built, all of which served aboard the then new Kiev-class aircraft carriers, and in the mid-80s there was a modernization of the Yak-38, known as the Yak-38M, which came into service. The main difference between the two is that the Yak-38M had way more powerful engines, as well as slight other improvements, and about 50 Yak-38Ms were built before the type was ultimately decommissioned in 1991. So this is definitely a special aircraft, mainly because of its very interesting VTOL capabilities. And I've got to say, on the dev server, when I was playing with this thing, I actually had a really fun time. It felt very sluggish, though, compared to how they describe it, so we'll have to see if the flight model was completely there or not. But we'll have to see when it comes to the vehicle. So, in War Thunder, the Yak-38 and the later modification will be coming to the Soviet tech tree. Now, one thing to note, and this is something which on the dev server, it's kind of hard to check. Also, it was kind of interesting how the American Harrier, the premium one, was for GE on the dev server, even though it still says in the Devblog that the American Harrier is going to be a pack vehicle. So just be careful about that. When it comes to, if you're purchasing GE to buy these things, make sure, especially since there doesn't seem to be any pre-order bonuses on these things, make sure to wait until the packs are released, and then you'll be able to work out if they're going to be available for GE or not. The Yak-38M, according to this devblog, is going to be a bundle, a special bundle available on the online store. So this will not be a GE aircraft. The Yak-38, the standard Yak-38. The Yak-38M is the one which is going to be in the Soviet tech tree. It's going to be after the Yak-30, staying in the Yakovlev line. But just for the Yak-38, it's going to be a bundle. So probably we'll have some premium next to it. Probably we'll have some GE. You know how it is with these things. So the first thing to understand about this vehicle is when we look at the the Yak-38M. The Yak-38M is powered by up to 3 jet engines. It has 2 in the front and 1 in the booty. The main engine that provides the majority of the thrust is the Tumansky R28-300 turbofan engine. This gives it 7,300 kgf of thrust and powering the aircraft's 2 rear thrust nozzles. And then it has 2 other engines at the front of the aircraft, and what these do, they're a pair of Kolesov RD-38 turbojet engines, and they're mounted vertically behind the cockpit, generating 3,250 kgf of thrust each. These 2 engines obviously help with the VTOL capabilities of the vehicle. All 4 nozzles, you can see the 2 engines at the front here, all 4 nozzles do aim down when this thing is trying to float. So that is something to, that is something to see. It needs all of them to get it up there. Now, generally on the dev server, as I said, it felt a little bit like a bus. I don't know whether that was because its flight characteristics were not ready yet, or if there was something slightly wrong with it, but it definitely didn't feel as nice to maneuver as something like a Harrier. It also didn't have access to war emergency power. It was just 100%. It obviously doesn't have an afterburner. This machine is not supersonic, it's going to be subsonic, but to make up for all of those things, this machine has some ridiculous weaponry, and this is where I think it will come into its own. I don't think it will come into its own when it comes to its flight performance, because at 9.7, which it was on the dev server, that is not great flight characteristics, I've got to be honest. There's a lot of afterburning vehicles running around, there's a lot of highly maneuverable ones, there's a lot of supersonic ones, there's a lot of stuff you're going to face. But this machine has access to some ridiculous weaponry. First of all, it can get access to R60s. These are IR-guided AAMs. You will find them on MiG-21s, mainly the SMT, and also the new MiG-21 BIS that is coming in. You'll also find it, I believe, on the MiG-21MF, but don't quote me on that. The R60s are the best IR missiles that the Soviets get access to, and they're at 10.7. This thing's getting them at 9.7. They have a 30G overload. They are incredibly good at what they do. They did get slightly nerfed when it came to the dev server. Their explosive mass was reduced, so therefore they shouldn't have as great of a proximity hit, but at 9.7 they should be completely fine. So this machine gets access to R60s, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. It also gets access to a new missile. Now, this new missile is the KH-23M AGM, and at least on the dev server, this missile had 3 times the explosive mass as a Nord, and it also had SACLOS guidance. Now, what is SACLOS? Well, the way that it works in game is that it's mouse guided. It will follow the center of your mouse, and that means that you can guide in this AGM against ground targets with your mouse. So you don't have to deal with the keyboard, you don't have to deal with anything like that. All you have to do is point the nose of your vehicle at the target and the missile will hit. Now, we could only carry 2 of these, but if you get it correctly, just like something like a G91R3, it can easily be a guaranteed 2 kills, especially with the explosive mass of this thing. We tested it with even Abrams, and we hit to the side of Abrams, didn't even hit the Abrams, and the whole thing blew up on the M1A1 and also the M1A2. These missiles go at Mach 2. They also have a ridiculous launch range as well. So yeah, they're looking incredibly good for what they are, but at least the machine only gets 2 of them. The main way that I see it is this is going to have a very high impact very quickly, but then after that point, I think it's going to struggle. It does have a centrally mounted set of 23 millimeters, which I suppose is kind of nice for it, but at the same time, as I said, the flight performance was at least poor on the dev server. Maybe that will change, but I heavily believe that this thing is going to live or die by its secondary ordnance. It reminds me of a vehicle like, let's say, in ground forces, where let's say it's not very fast, maybe it doesn't have a turret, maybe it's got okay like traverse or something, maybe it's it's got, an okay gun, but it has a ridiculous round, right? That's how I see a machine like the Yak-38. It doesn't have a lot of great characteristics, but the characteristics it does have great are absolutely amazing, and that is the form of its secondary weapons. Hopefully this thing does do okay in the game and does match up to the Harriers, which we have coming in. One of the things to also note about it is when it comes to the VTOL stuff, I'm not entirely sure how useful the VTOL is actually going to be in War Thunder. I like it as a gimmick. I think it's a cool mechanic to have. It's really nice that it's been developed as an idea, but generally I'm not sure any real combat areas where it's going to be useful. Even in landing, I still think it's going to be easier to land without using the VTOL stuff. Unless, I suppose, you're only given the aircraft carrier for the Soviets, then you're going to have to be forced to land like that. So yeah, I suppose there's that, but even then it's not going to be many situations. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez B. Young, and also Hans Fagellen, Sebastian Mizon, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.